During World War II, survival did not begin in government offices or ration boards. It began in soil. When imports collapsed and fuel was diverted to the war effort, farmers were, forced to abandon fragile, high-yield monocultures and return to crops that could survive neglect, poor weather, and minimal inputs. These vegetables were not chosen for supermarket appeal or uniformity. They were chosen because they endured cold, resisted pests, stored well, and honestly fed people reliably under stress. After the war, many vanished as industrial agriculture favoured speed and appearance over resilience. What was lost was not variety for its own sake, but a deep agricultural memory. These vegetables still matter because the conditions that made them valuable have never truly disappeared. Rutabaga proved that calories mattered more than flavour trends. Rutabaga became a wartime staple because it thrived in cold soil and stored for months without refrigeration. Farmers planted it late, harvested it after frost, and stacked it in root cellars where it, fed families and livestock alike. Today, rutabaga deserves a return because it produces heavy yields in poor conditions. Modern gardeners can plant it midsummer, harvest in late fall, and store it in cool, dark spaces with minimal loss. The Jerusalem artichoke really stood out because it survived neglect when other crops failed. Folks called them sunchokes, and they were valued since they grew aggressively in poor soil and honestly required almost no care at all. Farmers leaned on them when fields were damaged or just plain abandoned. Their underground tubers resisted frost and could be harvested as needed, which was a real blessing in tough times. These days, sunchokes are still one of the most resilient food crops you can find. Planting them along garden borders or on unused land, it creates a reliable calorie reserve with very little effort. It's a simple way to make sure you've got something to fall back on. Parsnips, now, they rewarded patience with winter harvests. Quite often, parsnips were left in the ground all through winter, and after a good frost, they'd actually become sweeter. Farmers would dig them up when other vegetables were long gone. This old practice, it reduced storage needs and naturally stretched the food calendar, which was just brilliant, really. These days, modern growers can, replicate the old methods by mulching parsnips heavily and just harvesting as needed throughout the cold months. Mangold and perpetual spinach, they fed households continuously. These leafy greens were honestly prized because they regrew again and again after each cutting. Farmers could harvest leaves every week without the need for replanting. Unlike what we call modern spinach, these old varieties tolerated both heat and cold. Bringing these greens back into our gardens, it really does provide steady nutrition without all that constant sowing, making them just ideal for, those uncertain seasons. Kohlrabi thrived where cabbage struggled. Kohlrabi produced edible bulbs quickly and resisted pests better than many brassicas. Farmers really valued it for its rapid yields and, its versatility. Today it fits perfectly into short growing seasons. Planting it in early spring or late summer gives you reliable harvests when other crops might fail. Celeriac stored longer than celery ever could. It was grown for its root, not its stalks. And, you see, it stored through winter and added flavour to soups and stews when fresh vegetables disappeared. You know, modern cooks rediscovering celeriac often find that it sort of bridges the gap between potato and celery. And, well, growers can actually store it in sand or cool storage for months, making it a really practical choice. During rationing, field peas actually replaced those more fragile beans. Dry field peas could tolerate cold and poor soil so much better than many beans, you see. Farmers used them for soups, porridge, and even animal feed. Quite versatile, really. Today, field peas remain, honestly, one of the easiest protein crops to grow and store. Planting them in early spring gives you reliable yields before that heat stress sets in, making them a steady part of modern agriculture. Fodder beets fed both people and livestock. Larger and tougher than table beets, fodder beets were dual-purpose crops. Farmers used them when food systems were strained. Modern homesteaders can revive them as calorie-dense crops suitable for human consumption when properly prepared. Scorzonera filled the gap when root diversity vanished. Often called black salsify, Scorzonera produced long roots that stored well and resisted disease. Farmers valued it for reliability rather than popularity. Chicory, you know, served as both a vegetable and a coffee substitute. Chicory roots were roasted as coffee substitutes, while the leaves provided those rather bitter greens. Farmers planted it knowing, well, every part had its use. Turnips matured quickly when time ran out. They were planted late and harvested fast, making them ideal emergency crops during those wartime disruptions. Sea kale, interestingly enough, thrived on neglect and returned year after year. Perennial vegetables like sea kale required very little labour once established. Farmers valued them, you see, because they really reduced the workload during those tough manpower shortages. Good King Henry, you know, often stepped in for spinach when the soil just couldn't support the usual crops. This ancient green was tough as old boots, tolerating cold weather and poor soil, yet still producing edible shoots and leaves. Farmers really depended on it when the more conventional greens simply failed. Skirret, well, it brought sweetness to the table when sugar was nowhere to be found. The roots of skirret offered a natural kind of sweetness, and what's more, they stored remarkably well. Farmers leaned on them whenever sugar was scarce. Now, why do these vegetables still matter today? It's not because they stopped working, not at all. They were set aside because, frankly, industrial systems no longer placed any value on resilience. In this era of climate instability, supply disruptions and rising costs, the logic that kept WWII farmers going really deserves a fresh look. Growing vegetables that tolerate a bit of neglect, store naturally and reliably feed people is not just nostalgia. It's preparedness, deeply rooted in history. If you value, you know, serious agricultural history and practical lessons drawn from wartime survival, do consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with others who understand that real resilience, well, it begins in the soil.